Well, we're here at Deakin Stadium in the changing room with Canberra's very own football superstar, Luke Big Fella Pilkington, as we've been told to call you. He won Series 2 of Football Superstar back in 2009. Big part of it, a big part of his career, but not obviously the whole part of it. We'll talk a bit about that later. Luke, how have you been?
Good, man. Good. So I've been back at Canberra now since the start of March last year. So that's almost a year now, and getting ready for the second season here with Canberra.
Yeah, you settled into Canberra, Croatia pretty quickly, playing a variety of positions last season. Easy club to get involved with?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I grew up with Dino, head coach, going back to under 12s, 14s, all the way through the sort of ACT build up there. And Deakin's been the top club in Canberra for however many years now. So it's an obvious choice to come back to a club like this. They're very hospitable. Gave me the get-go straight away, and I didn't have another choice basically.
We'll talk a lot about that a bit later on as well, but I want to start with your career as well. And I mentioned Football Superstar, and we will mention it a little bit later on. I know you're probably sick of talking about it. Yeah, a long time ago now. But tell us about how your career began. You mentioned a bit with the juniors here, and you had a spell at ANU as well, didn't you, in the Premier League?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a long time now, but started up through Brindabella Blues and the Blue Lights and the Western Creeks of the world, and then my career sort of transitioned into that ACT sports side, then schoolboys was part of it, but then the whole ACTAS when we were playing in the Premier League down here up until I was about 17. And then, like you said, ended up under Johnny Mitchell there at ANU when there was a bit of a select side put together. And then from there, the whole superstar thing happened, and that was my transition down to Melbourne.
Seems a kind of thing that happens to ANU football. There's Tommy Roderick doing something very similar with the 9.
He's doing a bit better than me. Watching him the other night, he's killing it at the moment. So
yeah, scoring after 20 seconds, having to disallowed. I mean, it's a bit rough, wasn't it?
Yeah, he's doing a bit better.
So can you tell us a bit about a key moment in time when you changed your mentality about football? I mean, obviously there was a moment, the Football Superstar was probably a key part of that, but before that though, there must have been a time when you were playing, you're thinking, I wouldn't mind making a career out of this.
Since the get-go, since I can remember, I've always wanted to try and go as far as I can and play pro football. So there was never a change in mentality. It's just when the opportunities came, or when I had the opportunity to go further in the game, I gave it everything I could. So growing up through that sort of ACT sport into the ACTAS and getting coached under the Milos of the world and all the rest of it, that's where it improved on my skill, but also taught me the mentality I had to have if I really wanted to make it. But from a young age, I've always wanted to go as far as I could.
Yeah, obviously having ability, technique, and the skill set is important, but there must be some real key personal attributes that you need as a person and as a player to make it as a professional as far as you can. Mentality you talked about as well. What are those attributes do you think that you can touch on yourself that allows people to make that step up?
Look, I think, growing up, I've always had the drive and the hunger. And I've learned growing up and going through that sort of, especially when I moved down to Melbourne, I've learned that you're playing with the big boys down in those leagues. And I'm not putting the Canberra NPL down by any means, but when you're growing up there and you're playing against men at 18, 19, 20 years of age, you learn that you've got to have grit, you've got to have a bit of ticker about you, and you've got to be hard. And I think I've got to where I got to, having that sort of determination to just be consistent day in, day out, and really drive home how hard you have to work to get to where you want to go. Now, I got as far as I could, and I've got no regrets about where I got to. I gave it literally everything I could, right? So, looking back, there's no regrets whatsoever. It's just that you get as far as you do, don't you? So I think determination, having a grit, and being consistent with yourself in terms of going to training, consistent with yourself in terms of performing, consistent with yourself in terms of reviewing what you've done. So that's what I'd like to take throughout my journey so far, and I'll keep applying it.
We'll talk about the Victorian Premier League in your time with Bethany and Dan down there a little bit later, but before we do, I'd like to touch on the fact that you mentioned it was physically difficult for you down there at times. Having watched both the NPL in Canberra, New South Wales and Victoria, you do notice that technique-wise there's not much in it, but when you go to somewhere like Victoria, did you find the physicality and the pace of the game was much different than it is up here?
A lot. Not that I felt that I was out of my depth. I thought I picked it up pretty quickly, but pushing yourself at those levels where it's so much sharper. It's just a faster, harder game, right? You're talking about the second tier equivalent under the A-League, right? right? So you're going to have the big brutes. You've got the experienced players when you're 19, 20, or 21 going into those leagues, and you've got the 30-year-olds, the 35-year-olds who've been there, done that. They're not going to waver on a tackle with some 19-year-old kid. They're going to put you in the stands and tell you about it, right? So you instantly have to grow up, and you instantly have to learn how to look after yourself and give it back as well if you want to sort of succeed in that environment, I think.
You can't really train for that, can you? You have to be put in that environment. I guess it was very similar to me growing up in the UK, where it was very physical. You have to be put in that environment to learn it, rather than it's not something you can practice on the training ground, really, is it?
It's not something you can practice because unless you've got the drive and the hunger out of every single player in your team to potentially be able to do it in a training sense, it's not going to replicate itself in a game because you're not playing up against that week in, week out, right? So it's the total environment and the professionalism around that environment that drives it. So with the professionalism, you've got faster players, you've got harder players, you've got more skillful players. That you just have to learn to adapt and thrive in that situation. So
let's rewind your career a bit and talk about your major influences growing up and pushing you towards a career where you're at. And can you name a few? You mentioned Dino in the under age group, so, and maybe your parents were involved in that kind of thing.
Yeah, Dad was my coach until probably growing up, on and off coach. Coached us to a few junior titles back in the day, but then the likes of Dino came in, and that's when we started getting into these ACT state squads, and then obviously Milo Milovanovic was a big part of that coaching. What would you call it? Environment that the coaches that I grew up under. They were the main influences. Johnny Mitchell, like I said, with that ANU team, and then it was just down to Melbourne from there. So that was the coaching scene, and obviously you're playing with your peers that are all trying to strive to the highest level as well. That drive you every day in your training. So
you obviously had the talent and ability, but obviously football superstar was where a lot of people might know you from. You can still watch them on YouTube. I think. You can go back and check it out if you want to. I think. But you had to. You had to apply for it. You had to send in a video, I think, if I remember rightly, and then you had to be selected from a group from trial dates in Canberra and stuff. Tell us a little bit about that process and how you're feeling, if you can remember that far back.
Yeah, so there wasn't a video. What happened was one of the boys I was playing with at the time, he goes, I'm going up to this sort of tryout thing in Sydney, you've got to come. And I was doing nothing with him, so I decided to go up with him. And it was basically in every major city around Australia, there was, I think, unlimited, or whoever registered to come and do a skill session. So it was shooting into areas, one-on-one battles, a bit of fitness, a bit of cone dribbling, timing, like physical sprints, physical testing, all the rest of it. Out of each city, top 10 were chosen. Went down to a Melbourne weekend where you had the Melbourne Victory coaches overlooking everything. From there, they selected, I think it was 15 boys. Went into a house for 6 weeks and then just sort of got picked off as the coaches found out what you were like as a player, what you were like as a person. And long story short, ended up coming out on top, and that was the big transition down to Melbourne.
Yeah, because the winner obviously got a contract with Melbourne Victory for a year, and we'll talk about youth contract, sorry, yeah. And we'll talk about that in a second. What I wanted to touch on though was 6 weeks away from home at a relatively young age, in a house full of what were your competitors, all vying for that same spot. That's a little bit like being in the dressing room, isn't it? When you've transferred to a new club, and you've got to build relationships with people within that environment because you're living on each other's hands near enough. But you've still got to be competitive with each other. How did you find that? How did you find building that relationship off the field with being a competitor against them on it?
I guess because I've grown up going through state squads and trying to push it to the highest level, so you're always meeting new players in those higher positions, you're always the small fish in the big pond, right? So going into that environment, I didn't find it too daunting, especially when you feel like you've earned it through those trial processes to get there. And you meet them along the way, I guess. So by the time you're in that environment of 15 competitors, but you've also got to be friendly for 6 weeks in a house, you learn what those players are like. You obviously have these select few that you stick tight with, and there's a couple of us still mates to this day. So I didn't find it difficult. You just know you're there to do a job. You know you're there to get results for yourself. You're there. When you're playing that team environment, you've got to show that you're part of the team, but then when it comes down to that one-on-one stuff, it's just about putting your head down and getting it done for yourself.
And everything surrounding it as well, the TV part of it, the interviews you had to do, people perhaps recognising you in the street and that kind of thing because of what happened. How did you cope with all of that?
It was daunting at first, to be honest. It was such a whirlwind because I went down there probably a couple of months before my 19th birthday, and then found out, or couldn't really tell anyone until about a week after my birthday, and then Ernie Merrick called me up and said, "You've got to come down to Melbourne, your contract's starting." So I had a week's sort of turnaround, thinking, "Oh, I've got a couple of months to readjust and get down there." But he's like, "No, training's in a week, get down." So that was tricky to go, move down to a state where I knew no one, moved into a uni dorm room where I knew no one, training with like top pros in the A-League who are just looking at this little kid who's come off the TV show, let's be honest, right? So you've got no gumption, you've got nothing behind you to say, I'm sort of worthy of being here. So that was tricky, and in all honesty, I hated the first 6 months of Melbourne. I came up with stress fractures, both shins, within the first couple of months down there. Couple of little injuries, so I wasn't even part of that squad that was playing consistently, but to be a part and earn that, not respect, but sort of like be part of that cohesive environment. And then you start making mates at the uni dorms and understanding, this is how life's going to be now, so, and you just learn to get on with it and start enjoying your environment.
Yeah, you talk about going into that environment and you've got to earn that respect, haven't you, as well? And it doesn't just come cheaply, does it?
No, not really. And that's in every walk of life, right? You go into a new job, you've got to earn respect. You've got to show what you're capable of in every walk of life, even if you feel like you're going down a level by whatever means. You've still got to earn the respect of the people in that place, otherwise they'll just click on the outside. And I think that's one of the biggest things was having a good mental attitude and being humble about where you've come from or what you're doing. And you earn respect from people when you give respect as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the performance levels that you had to get to that kind of level. All of a sudden, you're in an A-League environment with a youth contract, training with these professional footballers. How big was the jump? Was it noticeable for you? Did you notice somebody go, wow, all of a sudden the professional level is so much more? And did you have to give so much more of yourself personally?
The biggest thing was the jump in pace and how fit you had to be constantly. The pace of the game is that instead of being able to jog around at 50% in between plays or whatever, you're going at 80-90%. You're doing that high intensity running rather than just jogging around. And that's the skill level is up there because they're sharp and they're doing it day in, day out, right? That's their full-time thing that they have to learn to do in that professional environment. So when you come into it and you're not used to it, of course it's a steep learning curve, it's a steep learning curve, you've got to do it.
You mentioned this with Nicky as well, being away from home, looking after yourself. It's not just the football aspects that you've got to do. How did you work that balance between, I've got to focus on my football career, but also need to be doing things outside of it as well?
I had a good bunch of friends in the uni dorms, a small bunch down there that I made friends with, obviously. They were studying at the time, and I was enrolled because as part of the winning contract or whatever, you get the youth contract with Victor and I had a scholarship to Monash Uni as well. So that gave me accommodation, and because I was in that mentality of I want to become a pro footballer and that's all I'm going to do, that's all I'm going to focus on. I didn't give too much to that Monash University degree, right? It gave me 2 years free rent down there, it gave me meals for a year or whatever it was. And I built a little support network around me where you can turn off from football and you've got your friendship group. Like up here I've got a really big friendship group and it's great going down there. That's what the biggest change was. It was so different being on your own, being isolated and just going to work essentially, going to football. Which isn't a bad thing, let's be honest, but looking back, hindsight's 20/20, but looking back, if I put a bit more attention towards that university side of things as well, things might have been, who knows.
Looking at the experiences you had there as well, we were joking before we came on the chat, you were saying you didn't have many games for Victory, but you did still have A-League experience, you did still have Asian Champions League experience as well, I think, if I remember rightly. Tell us a little bit about that and what it was like when you were putting on the jersey and walking out in front of those crowds before those games.
So leading up to it, one of the biggest memories I have is when we were all sat down at the end of training and he called me up into the first team because it happened 2 days before each game. You'd have the first team announced basically and he called me into that squad and that was a huge rush for me. Then we flew up to North Queensland and that was my debut up against the Fury back in the day. Came off a 10-minute cameo at the end or whatever, but it's adrenaline. You run off adrenaline. You don't even think how to play football. You run off adrenaline. It's just a matter of what I tried to do is just keep your head in the right spot and know what you had to do, and listen to the coach's instructions and run as hard as you can.
You talked about learning respect from the players within the group. Was that around that time that they realised that you weren't just the kid off the TV, as you mentioned, that you could actually play a bit as well?
I'd like to hope so. Look, they're a big group. The Kevin Muskets, the Archie Thompsons, the Grant Brebnans, the Adrian Layers of the world, right? So that big A-League names. And you'd like to think you had a bit of respect, and everyone was friendly by the time I'd left. And I thought I did enough when I got signed on a 1-year pro after that first initial youth contract. So, I thought I'd done enough to get to that point and be part of the inner workings. But then, as football goes, you weren't good enough the next year and you've got no contract. So
yeah, it's a real cutthroat business.
It is, and you learn it the hard way. But luckily enough, I'd been able to sort of play well enough in sort of youth league games to get noticed by a couple of clubs in the Premier League there, and Bentley came knocking, and that was the next stage of what I thought was my best or favourite, most enjoyable time down in Melbourne.
Yeah, Bentley Greens was a good period for you as well, and again looking back, you had a decent FFA Cup run as well, didn't you? And I remember watching you on TV in those matches. That must have been sometime in your career.
That was fun. I know the memories look back on that, so I said I'd give him a shout out as well. That's where I met the captain down there, Jack Webster, and the likes of Liam McCormick and all the other boys, Matty Thurtell, Brent McGrath, Al Bray. These are the memories you make down there. So we had 2 championships, a couple of premierships. We made quarterfinals of the FFA Cup. We made the semi-finals of the FFA Cup. There was a big 5 or 6 years that I was with that club, and the club looked after me. It's a great club in there, and I was glad to get success with it. We did well under Johnny Anastasiadis, who's now at Western United. He's a great coach, and Gabbo as well as the assistant coach there. We had a great little click, and we got the results for what I thought was a worthy performance throughout those years. Yeah,
it's always great to see the NPL teams reach that stage of the FFA Cup competition. And what do you think it was that drove teams to that success? So of course, we saw Canberra Olympic doing it at this venue a few years back as well. And what do you think those NPL clubs need to stand them above and get to that stage? Obviously, you get the draw, but you have to beat the top teams at some stage.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think, look, we were quite lucky. We weren't lucky in the draw. We did very well the whole tournament through. We beat Black Towns Olympics out of Sydney. Our only real loss, the only loss in that stage was against Perth Glory in the semis, right? So, and I think they did us 2-0 from memory or whatever it was. So, we had a great squad. You've got a good click with a good belief system. Everyone had each other's back. It's all about that team mentality. And if one bloke's not doing their job, they'll know about it. But when one bloke does above and beyond, they'll know about it as well. It's about keeping everyone honest and maintaining a fair and hard-working environment. Everyone was there. Like a couple of interviews we had back then when we were having that success, the papers were writing up, "Oh, we've got a bloody demo man, we've got a bricklayer, we've got a stopper, we've got a," you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they've just come off 10-hour days, slugging bricks around and smacking demo, but then we come there and we train as hard as we could.
And that's it. That's the beauty of the FFA
Yeah.
Cup, isn't it? It gives the chances of those people that have had the trade system. Did they lean on you much in there, having had, even though it was a couple of years of experience of A-League? Did they ask you much about your preparation and that kind of thing for match days, or did the coaching staff have that under control?
Coaching staff, they had that under control. There was no pressure on any player to, whether you're captain, vice captain, whatever. There's no pressure on anyone to stand up and above the team. Or everyone has a leadership role, and you take that on personally. I don't think that's ever expected. Leaders stand up and rise to the top, and that's what helps drive the team. Coaching staff had it all down pat, would never expect it, but they obviously said people rise up that help them drive through.
And then Dandenong City after that, was it? There was a move from Bentley to Dandenong. What prompted that move for you?
Look, it was just one of those things in football. It's my time at the club ended, and we left on a handshake in good terms. There was no bad blood or anything. Dandy came knocking, and they were in the NPL 1 at the time, looking for promotion. So a couple of us went down to Dandy. We won the championship that year, got them promoted, and they're still playing top flight NPL at the moment. And again, another great club. I've got not a bad word to say about it. It was a good little time. Got disrupted throughout COVID there for the last little bit before I decided to come back up to Canada. But yeah, we had some good success there as well. Won the Crow Cup down there. Deacon wouldn't be too happy.
Which brings us full circle to these guys, and a move back to Canberra as well. And you know, was it a personal family decision that you decided to come back to Canberra?
Yeah, look, I turned 30 last year, so age is getting on, even though it's not in life, it is in football. I feel like I sort of had my time playing at the top level down there, decided to come back up here. my fiance and I are in that sort of potential family sort of age group, right? Our wedding got cancelled from COVID. COVID was, that was a bummer. We were stuck in a house for 9 months down there, and I don't want to get political, but that prompted a move back up here to get out of that system a little bit, and where else do you come other than Camp Croatia?
Yeah, last season, and you kind of played in numerous positions for Dean. I saw you at centre back. Sometimes you pushed out wide in the 6 role, a bit further forward. As Luke Pilkington, where do you feel your best position is?
For the last 10 years before moving up here, I was playing left back. That was my known position, and then towards the end, when you get a bit slower, you start moving into that centre back role. So I've made a few little appearances in there for the Bentleys and Dandenongs of the world, but I see myself as that central defensive midfielder. I'm happy playing there. I keep saying to Dino, he's like, sorry for me to be out, and I'm like, doesn't matter, mate, I'll do a job wherever I put, right? If you put me at centre back, I'll try and control the game from there. In midfield, you've got to get forward a bit more and support that attacking play. Left back is where I've made my name and sort of played the last 10 years, so I'm happy going out there as well. It just doesn't matter, whatever's needed.
And you come to a club in Canberra, which is probably one of the most demanding clubs in Canberra in terms of the board here and the supporters and that kind of thing. Do you feel that you thrive on that kind of pressure? I'm talking about pressure in relative terms compared to what you've been to in the past, but in local terms, there is quite a bit of pressure for this club to succeed and win matches.
Definitely. You've got a massive Croatian backing, even Australian backing here that follow the club. And why would a club ever want to lose, right? And supporters feel the exact same way. Bentley had it with the Greeks in Super Eats. Dandy City was exactly like this, but to a scale of 3 or 4, right? It's just they expect nothing better, nothing less than the top result. And as a player, you're here in a club, they've given you the opportunity to play, you've got to provide for it. Because otherwise you might not sign next year. Or otherwise the club starts losing its sort of notoriety as that top club, and you don't want to be responsible for that.
You come back here and you walked into a dressing room with some pretty big personalities locally. How did you fit into that group?
Look, great lads. The biggest personality I think you're referring to is maybe Grubisha.
I never said any names.
Well, I'll call him down then. I know Matty, we sort of grew up in that system. He's a few years above me, but grew up through the ACTAS system and that. So we knew of each other growing up through there. And he played down in Melbourne for a little bit as well. So it's just one of those things. You become good mates with everyone, no matter what their personality is.
It's early days and you haven't played any friendlies yet, I don't think. But how do you feel it's shaping up for the new season once you get your contract signed, that is?
Where's the pros? We're shaping up well. We started training on, was it the 7th or 14th? I think it's the 7th of January. So we got in nice and early. A few boys still on holiday, but they'll be back soon. And, well, they are back this week, and then it's all systems go, isn't it? You don't ease into anything. You just got to get going, and you've got to be ready for it by round 1. Like we've got 2 months now until the start of the season. It's a lengthy pre-season, but we'll be fit. We'll be ready to go, and I don't think we've got much to. Not that we don't have much to worry about, but I don't think that we're going to come in questioning ourselves.
Looking back to last season, do you feel there's a sense of unfinished business here because the way that the season finished and the way that Tigers, top of the table at the time, they had the trophy. I have mentioned in other podcasts how exciting that end of season was being. We had 4 or 5 teams that were potentially could win this competition. Do you feel that as Canberra Croatia Football Club, there is a sense of unfinished business because you may well have taken that out last year?
There's always what could have happened, right? I don't see it as like a vendetta that we've got. We're just going to go out there and try and win every game. It sucks that COVID as it's raised its head again, as it has done the last couple of years, but what do you do? That's the environment. We had a bit of a form slump towards the end of the year. We were killing it up until that point. And I think now when we're all a big group and we get that big pre-season ahead of us and learn that we've got to push it through into that third of the season, I think you're going to see a change in the players this year. And I think we're going to push through hard because we know that we slumped and everyone was filthy with themselves. So coming this year, I think you'll see us maintain that standard.
2 more questions to ask you just before we finish. One of them, there's probably a lot of young kids hopefully watching this chat with you and wondering how they can become a professional footballer. And you were there and you touched those heights. And can you give a little bit of advice to anybody watching this if they were 10 or 11 or whatever and saying, look, this is what you need to do to be able to push yourself to that level?
although it was briefly touched those sides, I think it just comes down, like I said earlier, it just comes down to being consistent. And one of the biggest things is there's not really many that friends in football, right? You've got to go and do it for yourself. You're going to have your support networks that help you through, but you've got to believe that you can do it. And like I said, I have no regrets because I literally gave everything. Gave away the sort of uni potential at a scholarship level, gave away moving down to Melbourne and growing up through 20s around that area. You just have to believe as far as you can, and you go as far as you can. There's no point looking back and saying, "Oh, I wish I did this," or "I wish I did that," or "What if?" So.
I think you're being a bit harsh on yourself. There's many people watching this that give their right arm just to walk out once in an A-League game and sit on the bench, mate, let alone what you've achieved in your career.
Yeah, I just don't like spruiking.
That's why we're here to spruik it for you. Finally, though, I want to ask a question, Luke. 31 now.
Shit.
Yeah. How long do you think you got left, and what can you offer? And what's your future hold? You know, I mean, you're a smart cookie. You know football. Do you think coaching might be a role for you at some stage?
In terms of playing, I've said to the club this year that I'm putting the boots on again, and we'll see. I'm going to go year by year now. Like I said, life's coming to that point where work and trying to build a career in that aspect. Finished a uni degree in the last couple of years, so pushing that corporate world life and see what comes of that. And again, just applying the same mentality of give it everything and see what happens. Right? So I don't know. Coaching hasn't really come across my mind. Just because I've been playing, and I know a lot of players that start doing the A and B or C, B licenses, whatever, but it hasn't really crossed my mind because I've just been focused on playing. It could potentially come. I don't know if I'd have the urge or the keenness to come to training every week or every night and not play and just tell people what to do. It's a bit different, I guess, but we'll see what happens.
Well, you've certainly learned under some really great coaches throughout your career, and you've had some super experiences. Thanks for joining us this morning, Luke. It's been great to chat to you again, and good luck for the rest of the season coming up, and hopefully we see you on the field, perhaps scoring more headers than you did last year.
Yeah, I only got one last year. I need a few more. Nah, thanks for saying that.
No problem.